Amen. So, guys, where'd y'all leave off? It's the fourth commandment. Have we gotten through the fourth commandment? Yes. Got through, so we're jumping to big number 5, right? Okay. Number 5 with a bullet. Here we go. Stephen, what is the 5th commandment? Yeah. Patrick? Today you're Patrick, what's the 5th commandment?
5th is honor your father and your mother.
Perfect. And so, guys, why do you think that that's so entrenched in both early Levitical law and the law that Christ pulled forward? Why is that important? That's part of it.
And you run out the way of the creation, you as the Father. So
Absolutely. So it basically sets the structure in place, right? Because we as humans crave structure. And so what we want is those pieces of the puzzle to fall into place to give us a direction. And basically in doing this, in honoring thy father and thy mother, he is setting the stage of that's where children first learn how to approach God, is how they approach their parents. In the correct society. We've seen kids today go crazy, and I'll tell you some stories about that later, but that's the structure that Christ builds upon to build and fulfill the relationship with the Father, the triune God, okay? And I'm going to tell you, out of all the commandments, and I've been guilty of, pretty much all of them, well, except for the murder thing, but I've worked in military and law enforcement for a long time, so there's a reason they get to murder, and we'll get to that one in a minute, okay? But it sets the stage for your movement and approach toward God, to revere. In Paul, it says, approach the Lord with fear and reverence, right? Let each man work out his own salvation in fear and reverence. And the word fear is an interesting point in that, because the Greek had about 7 words for fear, and they all meant something different. And the fear that he's referencing there is approach with awe and reverence. It's not to be afraid. The trembling aspect that he mentions before that is more of an indicator of being in the presence of God and kind of being afraid, God-fearing. But that God-fearing word, what that means and the approach of it is to approach with awe and reverence, because it's the Creator. And to kind of reference and give you kind of a context for that, there was an old circuit rider back in the 1880s. And circuit riders were kind of non-denominational, either priests or ministers who would go out and minister to the Indians. And this guy had gone out to the Lakota Sioux. And he is out in a field one day and he's praying. He's praying fervently. He's just praying and praying and praying. Nobody around. He's just having his morning devotional to God. And the chief of the tribe sees him, and he walks up to him, and he's listening to him, and he's listening to him. And he said, who are you talking to? And he said, I'm talking to God. He said, God? He said, yes, the creator of everything. The man who put the sky above us and the grass beneath us. And he's given us everything we have. This joyous, he's God. He's the creator. And the Indian looks at him and says, wait, now let me get this straight. You're talking to the creator of everything. The one that created you, created me, created the grass, created the sky, created the deer, created everything. And the priest said, yeah. And he said, so you're doing that, and you're doing all the talking? So it's that fear and reverence aspect, and it's to approach that fear in Greek, that particular word is to approach with awe and reverence. And that the 5th commandment in honoring thy father and the mother sets that up to give you an understandable context in which to apply that fatherly bond. And so, but it also kind of opens the door to how parents are supposed to treat their children. We're supposed to treat them fairly in hopes, because God treats us fairly. it's basically that system is put in place to look at God as the Father. Not just the divine and deity, but the Father. And if you'll look at a lot of pagan faiths, if you look at Romans, just take Rome for a minute, since we were talking about, our archbishop, and we've seen the issues that Rome has had lately. If you'll notice in Rome, in all the great stories, there was a half-deity individual. But the relationship they had with God is different from the one that we have with God. And it basically broke that mold, saying that we all have a tie to, because he's our Father. So in honoring your parents, you're also honoring God, which pleases God, but you also have to understand that he is the Father that they're referring to. So it's putting the steps in place, the system in place, to set you up for success in your relationship with the Lord, okay? Now, out of curiosity, and one of the questions in the book, which is a good question, is how did Jesus keep the fifth commandment? Ma'am? I saw your looks. I said, oh, got a call. That's it. She had something. No, good. No, you're fine. That's actually a really good start. That's a really good start. Think of it like this. Okay, so when Christ was in Gethsemane, right? Okay, everybody tracking? We know what Gethsemane is. If we don't, I'll explain it. But remember when Christ, right before the Passion, Christ's in Gethsemane, okay? And this has always been an interesting topic of conversation that I've had with priests and with ministers and the Baptist and Church of Christ folk especially. But in that moment in Gethsemane, you see Christ's absolute humanity. Now, he was completely divine, 100% God and 100% man, right? We're taught that from the time we start as little kids in this church. But Christ was all man, right? He was. He walked the earth. He breathed. He was struck by all the problems that we have on a daily basis, which gave him insight into us. But there's a point in Gethsemane, and this is honoring thy Father, okay? So bear with me on this, and I'll answer questions after I get it out. But there's a point in Gethsemane where Christ is pleading with God. He is begging God because the human side of him understands what's coming. The divine side knows it has to be done. For that covenant to be created, it has to happen. But there's that human side that is equally terrified in that moment because he knows what crucifixion is. And I'll tell you, I've actually I had a theology class years ago where they brought several trauma surgeons in. And the trauma surgeons broke down what crucifixion was. And to that point, with the exception of one death that the Assyrians did at the time, one type of punishment, of capital punishment they did, it was the worst thing in the world. It was horrific. And these trauma surgeons went through every step he would have gone through. And I'm going to tell you, when I say you see grown men like me, like cops, in tears in this class as he's talking about it, because you understood the depth of the pain that he endured. Now, to tie that back around, where that ties into honoring thy father and thy mother, okay? In Gethsemane, Christ is pleading. He's saying, please don't let this happen. Please let this cup pass from me. He is so irate, he goes out and yells at the disciples, which is something that he didn't do. He chastises them for sleeping. Says he was sweating blood because he knew what was coming. But at the end of that, his human side finally caught up with his divine side. And what I mean by that, and he finally honored and fulfilled the fifth commandment. Because at the end of that, as he's standing there and he's praying and he's talking to his Father, and he's begging, he's saying, please let this cup pass from me. I don't want it. I know what's coming. I know how bad it's going to be. I've seen it. I've witnessed it as a child because it's what Rome does. Please don't make me do this. But there's a moment, a switch is thrown. There's a moment that divine side and the human side slam together. But at the end of it, he looks up and he honors his Father by saying, anyone? Go ahead, Father. Yes. But your will, not mine, be done. So not only does he know what he's going to, and he's knowing what he's going to face, and he's knowing that human side of him is going to die, and he knows the pain that he's going to experience. In that end, he honors his Father, but says, but you know what? Your will, not mine, be done. So in that one succinct moment, he honors the law of Moses, he honors the 10 Commandments, and he says, but your will, not mine, be done, because he's honoring his Father. You know, you hold, the church holds an authority. The church, the Father, all those systems I were talking about kind of coalesce. And that's why we call our priests fathers. Is in moving forward, we embrace them as part of our family, part of that continuum, part of that process. And so they become not only our friends, our spiritual leaders, but they also become a father figure for us. And we're called in the commandments to honor it. Now, you know, all authority comes from God, especially within the church and the confines of our life, right? We all know that. And we're called to honor that authority. And through that is you know, it ties back into the fourth in honoring the Sabbath and keeping it holy. All of these things systemically build upon each other to bring us closer in the presence of God. And with Christ as that model, with Christ the King, Christ our Father, the Lord, we see all of these commandments coming into place, right? We see them all moving into place, into being. And on that note, we're going to move on to big number 6. Who can tell me what the 6th commandment is? Zach, come on. Right. Now, a lot of Bibles, a lot of translations will say what? That is not what is written. That is not from the Greek. It is thou shalt commit no murder. Now the reason for that is murder is, can anyone give me, and I'm not talking about the definition in the world I live in, but can anyone give me a definition of the word murder? What murder is? Because there's a key to it, which will tie back into the commandments.
You're killing somebody on purpose.
On what?
On purpose, you know.
Well, sort of.
It's unwillful. It's unwillful, unjust.
Yes, thank you. Unjustly, unlawfully. And it's in that unlawful concept that you can tie it into the commandments, which are the law, right? The law of Moses, the law he brought down, right? It's the unjust killing. It's the unlawful killing. And so how does that differ? How does that differ from, say, war? Or say we're standing here and I'm up here and I'm teaching, or I'm in the pew, I'm in the first pew, and Father Gloria's teaching, and a man comes in with a gun and I shoot him. Is that murder? Why? Yes, but it is not unjust or unlawful. It adheres to both justification in the Bible and it adheres to justification by man. Because we're called to live lawfully in the place in which we find ourselves, right? Scripture says that. Sometimes that's harder than others. And sometimes we have to separate ourselves from it and be above it, right? Any questions? Anybody?
My uncle, he was a colonel, or was a colonel, in the military, and he served in Vietnam. And I attended a Christian school, and we had chapel every week, and he would speak at our chapel occasionally about being a Christian, yet serving in the military, and having to deal with, you know, war and the effects of war, and what one has to do during wartime.
And he's absolutely correct. And it's in those times that people typically go one of two ways. And it's crushing, and you pray that if they go the first way, they find their way back. But they're typically pulled from God or closer to Him. Because the act of taking a life is so abhorrent. I mean, it goes against everything that we're taught from the time we're children. Now, you also, but think back in terms of especially Old Testament, okay? Where God would send the Jews into an area and said, kill every man, woman, child, and crawling thing. Now, my question to you is, they go in there and they obey the law. They obey what their father has told them. They're honoring their father. Is that just? Thank you. That's where we find both redemption and understanding in the concept of thou shalt not murder. Now, you have a God-given right to defense of self. You have a God-given right to defense of others. You don't have a God-given right because I get mad at Patrick for me to go over there and hit him with a hammer. That also ties into early Levitical law, an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth, but that's not covered in this, so we'll get to that later. But let's look at what actions are considered murders, because I'll be honest, there's some of these that I don't agree with in the book. There's one, actually, that I don't agree with in the book. But these are the actions that the book touches on that considers murder. Okay, and several of them I don't know that any of us could refute. Genocide. Now, is there anybody in here that doesn't know what genocide is? If you don't, please raise your hand, and I got you covered. We good? Genocide. Okay. Infanticide. That's the killing of a child. I can't think of anything more horrific. Abortion really kind of falls under infanticide to me, but then you could argue there are exceptions to that. If given the choice, if I'm in there and there's a slim chance, there's no way that both of them will survive, and the doctor says, who do we save? Do you save the mother or the child? That's a decision you got to hit your knees for, and you got to pray. I know what I would do. And the aftermath would probably cause me to be divorced. But I know what I would do. And this is the one I have issue with. And I'll give you some background in this when I say it. I personally struggle with the concept. And this is something that I'll talk to Father Glore about and Father Mark about. I struggle with the concept of suicide being an unforgivable sin and murder. Because I have seen people so destroyed. I've known people that were so broken, that felt so bereft that they did that. And I have a hard time wrapping my head around the thought that would be held against them. And that's something, I told you when we started this, you're going to hit points where you're going to have to reconcile in all of this. And I told you that the first time I taught. And this is one of them. And how you reconcile that is by talking to people in the church, people of the faith, people that are with you, and your priests, your fathers. And they'll help you work through it. Euthanasia. That's another one I struggle with. Because I've seen people with stage 4 cancer that they're doing everything they can to keep them alive. And actually, I'll tell you a story about this. And I actually gave a sermon on this one time. Years ago, I was extraordinarily close to my grandfather. My father and my grandfather, two greatest people I ever knew. Well, except for the Lord, but the two greatest people I've ever known. And my grandfather had fought in Tarawa and Iwo Jima and gotten shot in the back. He went in older. He was already in the Marine Corps. He was a BAR man. And they couldn't remove the bullet from him at the time because they were on a boat and it rocked and they thought they might paralyze him. They stabilized him and he lived with a bullet in his back for all these years. And a piece of the bullet when he was 94 broke loose. It got lodged in his neck. They went in and they removed it. He came through that fine. He was 91, I'm sorry, not 94. But came through that fine. They missed a piece when they got the bullet out of his back and it went up lodged again. So they had to go back in again. So they put him back under, did all this, went fine. As he is, now his sisters, my grandfather was one of 13 kids. He was the youngest one to die at 91. The rest of them died 101, 102, 105, 100. But his sisters were bringing him food constantly up to the hospital because they didn't think the hospital food was any good. Now, while convalescing, while recovering in the hospital, he got food poisoning. And the food poisoning is what killed him. But I was younger, and there was a priest I was very close to, Father George Wood. Loved George Wood. And I was there when my grandfather was dying, and I was outside in the glass wall, and I had been praying. Man, I had prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. I had prayed more fervently than I ever had in my whole life. And George Wood had told me years ago, he had said, my son, I'm going to tell you this with absolute certainty. God answers every prayer, every single one. Now, he didn't expound on that, but he said God answers every prayer. Me being a good Anglican, I believed him, and I still do. So I hit my knees and I prayed, please, Lord, let my grandfather survive. Please, Lord, let my grandfather make it. Let me have more time with him. And so I'm sitting there and I'm watching him through this glass, and his face is in such pain. And he's dying. I know it. The doctors know it. Everybody knows it. But I'm praying just as hard as I can that God will spare him. And I'm watching him through this glass as I'm praying, and I see his face, and it goes from extreme pain to relief and then a smile. Then he was gone. And I was so upset about that. I was so angry because I'd been praying all this time. And God answers every prayer, every single one. That's what I was told. And the first person to me, oddly enough, wasn't my father. It wasn't, my siblings. It was George Wood. First person to me. He walks up, and he puts his hand on my shoulder. And I said, and I don't know why I did it. I turned to him and I said, Father, you said God answers every prayer. Do you remember telling me that when I was a kid? Do you remember that? He said, yes, I do, son. I've told a lot of people that, but I remember it. And I said, you lied. He said, did I? I said, you lied. I said, because I was sitting here praying as hard as I could that my grandfather would be okay, that he'd make it. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, I know you have been. I've been praying for you for that. And I said, okay. He said, but what you have to remember is at the same time you're out here praying for your grandfather, the same time I'm in the church praying for your grandfather is laying there praying to go home. And he said, so God had to answer one prayer, my son, yours or his. You tell me, did he make the right choice? And I said, well, since you put it that way, I guess I can't argue. And he was right, because he had been in pain for so long, he, I'm sure, wanted that to end. So, but I watched, the reason I bring that up is the euthanasia concept, because I've seen people so racked with pain that they would do anything to make it stop. So, Father, I ask you, is euthanasia a mortal sin? Is it forgivable? And I put you on the spot. I'm sorry, Mark. Mike.
I think it is forgivable.
I like that.
Well, are you talking about the person that assists and the person that wants it?
Both. Oh, that's good.
I think it's forgivable.
You see, if y'all notice, I didn't ask him about suicide yet, because that's what we're probably not having.
It's a slippery slope too nowadays, though, because you have countries like Canada that have allowed it into their law. Yeah, I mean, it's slippery.
Yes, sir.
I mean, you've had people like, was it,
There was an ad for assisted suicide and a blind guy that said, I lost my vision. Like, now I'm so excited because I'm finally not being allowed to because I'm not happy. There's like an advertisement from
stuff like that.
There's a, difference between being unhappy and being bereft. We all are going to experience unhappiness. We are. That doesn't mean it's the end. And I can still hear the men that trained me in my life, buck up, little trooper. Now, they said some words that I'm not going to say in church. And that I'm trying my best as a diaconate candidate and as a member of y'all's church to try and serve to stop those words. But it's hard when it's a whole language that you've worked in for so long. Here's a question, and I like this. How did Jesus extend the law against murder? Because he did.
In order to unjustly murder, there has to be a requisite. You have to have like an anger.
Absolutely.
You have to, something has to push you.
And expound on that. Anger. What goes with anger?
Just hatred and violence and and this feeling separated from God.
And there's people that will argue with you or argue to you and make a viable point. And by argue, I mean discussion, not actually argue. But they'll argue that what hell truly is estrangement from God. But where you were going with that was the right path. And what I'm getting at is whose sole authority is vengeance? It says so in the Bible. Who says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. So in extending that law about murder, I can't, and that's why I touched upon earlier, if I'm mad at Patrick, I can't hit him in the head with a hammer. Because vengeance is God's. Now, in means of defense or in means of society doling out a punishment, that's just because there's an agreement to it. There's an understanding of it. Thou shalt not commit murder, not thou shalt not kill. And I like this one too, because this is really kind of sparks. And I don't want to get too marred down in this one, but in this commandment. But is anger always sinful? You're shaking your head. Why? So you know I'm deaf.
You see Jesus flipping the tables in the temple with courageous anger.
Absolutely. And you've heard both of our priests different points talk about, and Mark made the comment that Christ was love but not tolerant. Now, anger can be justified, but that's a slippery slope. Because you can take that justification to really odd places and to extremes. Godly anger in response to wickedness and injustice are anger toward abortion. You're justified in that. There's a justification in that. Your anger toward murder, there's a justification in that. There's scriptural adherence to that, right? So anger is not a sin. It's your adaptation and use of it that becomes sinful. And again, I keep messing with Patrick, but that whole hitting him in the head with a hammer thing. Well, not only is the anger sinful, but if I manage to hit him so hard he's not with us anymore, that's murder. So I ran off with 2. That's 2 sins. This one's interesting, and this ties into what we talked about, so we're not going to dwell on it, but is it always wrong to harm or kill another?
If someone breaks into my house and is threatening my family, I'm going to do what I have to do to keep my family safe. And if that means taking the life of the individual who was trying to harm my family, then, I think that is justified.
Well, in people that I work with in my line, we take an oath to defend those that can't defend themselves. So in that sense, now that's not to say if I didn't do it, which I'm leaving that job, by the way, guys. I'm not going to be a gun carrying officer anymore. That ends Friday. I've taken another job. But if you have a situation where the preservation of life, the defense of the innocent. Now, that too, you have to understand that everything we talk about is a slippery slope. Because the defense of the innocent, I could go down here and blow up an abortion clinic and inadvertently kill 4 people. Is that justified anger? Is that justified murder? Is that murder, or is that somebody, anybody? And y'all may not want to answer that one because you're like, that's too big of a conundrum. Good answer.
That's the reason why we have the law, to help us understand God's heart. So that helps us to understand the moral, greater natural law, moral justification or something. I mean, it's the foundation of law, essentially.
Absolutely. And God understands, because He created us, that we are inherently hedonistic. And we are prone to extreme outrage. So you have to understand the value of life and how Christ came to give life more. Go ahead, Father. Yes, give life more abundantly. And in doing so, that unites us. And are you seeing the pattern that all this is building upon each other? Your father's going to tell you not to go out and kill somebody. So you got to honor your father, right? But murder, we can't do that. That's not justifiable. But there's some requisites that maybe make it okay. Not okay, but forgivable, understandable, acceptable in God's sight, because that's what we're shooting for. I'm not going to ask you how else we can obey the commandment, because I think we pretty much covered this one really in depth, and you guys have been amazing. Anybody? And this one's kind of spicy. What's number 7?
Shall not commit adultery.
Yes, sir. Now, what is adultery? And I love this because Father in the back's not moving his mouth anymore because he knows if I do it and nobody says anything, I'm going to go, okay, Father, go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
I think adultery is like you're with your partner, but you look eyes at another person or you talk to another person in that kind of way. Like you're cheating. Like you're in a relationship, let's say you're married, okay? Let's say the wife, she's looking at another guy, talking to another guy, like she's with him, but she's not with him.
Okay. So you're taking that scriptural approach. If your eye offends, pluck it out. Now, please don't do that. If you see a pretty woman walking or an attractive man, don't grab your eye out. But again, it's that process we're setting up. And you can take all things to the absurd. Okay? You can take things so strictly adherent that you lose the meaning of the message. But adultery is, okay, that's one definition, that even the thought of it is adulterous. Okay, so, and the other thing you have to realize is while we are Anglo-Catholic and the whole concept of mortal and venal sins apply, okay? Sin is still sin. And we're all going to commit them regularly. The difference is the repentance of it. There's a reason in the Creed where it says the remission of sin. As I touched upon this. Why did it not say the forgiveness of, but the word remission is used? Why remission? Remission is made spotless. It is removed completely. It is gone. It no longer exists. If I hit you in the head with a hammer and you don't die, and you forgive me, you were kind enough to come to me. And Patrick says, Clay, I forgive you. I forgive you for hitting me in the head. Right? I'm so sorry. And he means it. And I'm so moved. I'm like, that's amazing. And I go to hug him, and he goes, that's not remission. That's forgiveness, though. He's forgiven me, but he hadn't forgotten. He still knows that hammer's out there somewhere, right? Has he got it behind his back? Is he going to come over the top with it? So you've got to remember sin is a sin, and forgiveness is in there. Now, what does it mean? Because you touched upon Christ's talk about the eyes, right? The looking upon. And I'll tell you something interesting. I saw something about Charlie Kirk. And I watched as he was on a podcast with all of these adult film worker women. And he's talking to them, and he's expounding upon the Gospels, and he's talking. But I noticed in the podcast, he will, when he speaks to each of them, he'll quickly look, and he's always averting his eyes. He is maintaining that scripture about your eyes. And I always thought that was an amazing thing, watching him do it. That his wife and that covenant he entered into meant so much to him that he was going to honor both God and her. And that's kind of an amazing thing. And so let's move on to, what does it mean for you to be chaste? Does anyone know what that word? You raising your hand? Yeah. No? You sure? Because I didn't let you do somebody chaste. Anyone? Bueller. Somebody, come on. Zach, go ahead.
We reorient our hearts with honor towards others. We treat them as family and not as objects for gratification.
Good. And the concept of chaste means, like the root, the word, chase. You can't have it. It has to be earned. And that's through that covenant of marriage, you earn it. So how do you benefit in God's world from chastity? And that is such an odd word to me. But chastity. Corey?
It heals our hearts. Like we cease to harm others and to use them. We value them as humans. We see them for real.
Wow. You know what? I never thought of that. Repeat that.
So it heals our hearts so that we are no longer using people. They're not objects to consume. They're people that we have it restores us in our humanity.
So, and that's really, I love that. So you're actually taking the concept of chastity and expanding it beyond the physical touch aspect of the covenant into all aspects of your life. So that whole chastity, that I like that. I'm unabashedly, when I teach this class again, going to steal that because I really like that. Did y'all hear it? Do I need to get him to say it again? Because that was really good. That may have been the best thing said in the class today. One more time, Corey, for the sheep seats.
Sure. Chastity is what heals our hearts so that we can have a relationship with others rather than consuming.
Good. Now, why did God ordain marriage? Why? 5, 4, 3, go.
Is it because he wants us to become one as a whole?
Okay, so the church is referred to as what? Yes, the bride of Christ. So again, you remember me talking about the systemic development of each of these processes? How one builds upon the next and builds upon the next, and they're justified by each other? So Christ is referred to as the what of the church? The bridegroom, yes. So it's in that you see the unity of and the function of marriage. So a man and woman come together and they create a family, which if they do it properly and in the right way, it glorifies God. And then the families then come together and create a church. Well, God created the church. But you have your priests, everybody ties together, and you form into a Christian community. And that community, by all definitions, should exemplify every law in here. Every one. A lot of them don't. I'm not judging, but a lot of them don't. But again, it's that systemic build. You hear it in the creeds. You hear it here in the commandments. You hear it in the sermons that are given. You witness it in the act of communion, the Eucharist, the transubstantiation. And I know some of y'all probably don't buy into that. I do. What did Jesus... Okay, now, here's a tough one because I have been divorced. I have. why does the Catechism's book and the Bible, well, okay, let's back up. How does the Bible view divorce? Yes? Okay. Okay, and so putting context, especially of the time, okay? Back 4,000 years ago, 5,000, 6,000, Hebrew Levitical law comes into place. Okay. At that time, I could go to Kelly, my wife, and go, I'm done with you, get out. Now, as a woman in that period, which is odd to me, in the Jewish tradition, your lineage is applied to your mother, not your father. If your mother's Jewish, you're Jewish. If your father's Jewish and your mother's Gentile, you got a lot of work to do. But a woman at that time, if he put her out, it's a death sentence. Because her family won't take her in because she's been sullied or whatever. It is literally a death sentence. Now, the Bible does allow for certain reason for divorce. Infidelity. Now, that's an interesting word, infidelity. And we typically, and your adherents typically, take that to mean adultery, right? Y'all following me? So it ties into adultery, the adulterous behavior. But there's different types of infidelity. You can be unfaithful with lies. You can be unfaithful financially. You can be unfaithful by putting someone above your spouse. So that infidelity concept isn't specifically spelled out in the Bible as adulterous, but it's infidelity. Now, I do believe God hates divorce. But like all sin, there's forgiveness from it. And it is in that the adultery concept, and God forbids adultery specifically. It's just where they drew that lineage. Well, infidelity means because in the Ten Commandments it says adultery. Well, there's more than. It's expounded on further than. This is a very Catholic answer to this question, because I won't keep you too terribly much longer. This is a Catholic answer to this next question. Are some called to lifelong celibacy? Well, the book will tell you yes. God calls some unmarried life of faithfulness and chastity, and calling enables them to devote their lives to God and service without the responsibilities of marriage and family. What are your thoughts on that, folks? Bless you. Sir?
What was the question?
The question is, are some called to lifelong celibacy, and why?
I think so, but I couldn't tell you why.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. I think in Philippians 2:12, when Paul said, as we touched on, let each man work out his own salvation in fear and trembling, I think that you've got to work that out with God. You've got to come into communion with God, and much like that Indian asking the priest, you got to shut up and let him talk. And I will tell you, that is the hardest thing in the world for me to do. Because if left to my own devices, I will anthropomorphize God. And you cannot do that, because he is not us. All right, we're going to touch on the 9th commandment, and then I'm going to kick it to the next. Is that you, Father? You got the next one, or is it Eric? Well, whoever's got it starting with 9. The 9th commandment. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Say what? Dude, I'm sorry. Yes. Okay, let's just put a pin in it there, guys, and we're going to call it. I truly enjoyed, I love teaching you guys. Y'all are amazing. And I learn as much from y'all as probably more than I teach y'all. Because I'm not good at this. But thank you for humoring me. Guys, see you guys next week. Any questions before we call it? Okay.
You should say it to Mike, we always want.
Always watch it? Well, and see, honestly, with my last job, if I'd known, he couldn't have filmed me. So it doesn't matter now. But we're at the 9th commandment. Let's go from big old number 9. We're at the 8th? Okay. Oh, I thought you were doing the Ouroboros, the perpetual, eternal. Okay, let's do the 8th commandment, which is thou shalt not steal. That's a good one. That's an easy one. Because we all know you shouldn't. Let's do from the 8th to... Let's do from 106 to 121. So you will stop when you hit the right for admission into the catechumens. Ladies and gentlemen, thank y'all so much.